if you had two people trying to argue that, okay, the way I see it is the way to see it, I'm right and you're wrong, nothing fruitful really comes out of that. But if you had two people approach that same situation and say, okay, let's go shoulder to shoulder on this and try to understand, why do you think we disagree? Why would we see it differently? That's the only investigation that will lead to that amazing deeper truth of, oh, this has to do with sunlight and priors and stuff.
Today we welcome David McRaney on the show. David is a science journalist fascinated with brains, minds, and culture. In 2012, he created the podcast You Are Not So Smart, based on his 2009 internationally best-selling book of the same name and its follow-up, You Are Now Less Dumb. David is also an editor, photographer, voiceover artist, television host, journalism teacher, lecturer, and tornado survivor. His most recent book is called How Minds Change, and that's the topic of our conversation today. In this episode, I talked to David about the science of belief and persuasion. In this day and age of online tribes and echo chambers, changing people's opinions seems like an impossible task. Instead of arguing over facts, David encourages us to use empathy to understand why we disagree. He explains Piaget's framework behind knowledge building and shares the use of technique rebuttal for sincere conversations. It was a great honor chatting with David. He's someone who's inspired my own podcast, the Psychology Podcast. He has been in this podcast space so long, and he has thought so deeply about psychological issues that it was great to riff with him on such an important topic, especially in society today. So I now bring you David McRaney.
David, so great to finally have you on the Psychology Podcast.
I'm happy just to see you, Scott. I am so comfortable doing Zooms that I'll just drink coffee while we're talking. Look at this.
Me too.
So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. You know, I love you. I love your show. I'm seeing The Puzzler and How Minds Change back there on your bookshelf.
That's true.
You're killing it.
Thanks. Wow, what a great book and how timely it is. Before we jump into it, can you kind of tell our audience a little bit about yourself and who are you? What is your background? Tell us about your own podcast?
Sure, I'll try to be mostly brief. I call myself an author now. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. And podcaster and lecturer, content making individual person thing. I started out in journalism with working in newspapers and television. But I went to school to be a psychologist. I switched to journalism at the very end of my degree after being allured by the student newspaper. My first thing I wrote, and this is how I jumped into all this, was they were asking for opinion pieces. I don't know if this is replicated or it's still around or anything, but we had learned in psychology class that when your sports team loses, that sperm counts go down. I don't know if that's actually true anymore or that ever was true, but I thought it was a great article because our university had lost every one of its football games that year. And so I had this headline that was sperm counts reach record lows on campus, according to scientists, which, then you read the article and it's like speculation based off this thing. I remember one of my professors was like, have y'all seen this? Have you read about this? And that was it. I was like, that would be fun to write about these topics. But I didn't. I ended up going into getting that degree, and then I worked on like cops and courts and higher education, and eventually was in TV working on the back end on like social media and stuff like that. But I started a blog, and they went back to what I really wanted to write about, and it got surprisingly popular and led to a book deal. And then that led to me starting a podcast where I get to talk to people like yourself and just explore this endlessly. I carved out the niche of motivated reasoning, psychology, reasoning and judgment, decision-making, biases, fallacies, heuristics, that sort of stuff. And then somewhere along the way, I started becoming incredibly fascinated with persuasion and opinion science, of course, because of all the polarization and all the arguing and bickering. I just wanted to understand it better. And there's the way that led to this book, How Minds Change. So it's been years of work in it. There were two incepting points for this new book, which is I was giving a lecture and someone came up to me and asked, my father has fallen into a conspiracy theory. How can I get him out of it? And I remember saying, you can't, which was not true, but I felt it as I was saying it. I knew I didn't like what was coming out of my mouth, but I also realized that I was saying it because I didn't understand it very well and I shouldn't be giving advice. So I wanted to go into that. And then at the same time, the norms surrounding same-sex marriage and LGBTQ issues in the United States were shifting very rapidly around the time I said that. And I looked at the polling, and at the time I looked at the polling, 60% of the country had flipped over the last 3 years from being opposed to in favor. And if you weren't part of the activism that led up to that, to the many decades, it seemed to a lot of people on the outside that it just happened overnight. And it really was one of the fastest changes of public opinion in American history. But it really happened over the course of a decade or 12 years, the fast part, the rapid change. And I just imagine, what if you took all those people who were the 60% and put them in a time machine and sent them back 10 years ago? They would disagree with themselves. And I wanted to know what happened between this point and this point in their brains. And I just was just this massive thing I didn't understand. I wanted to understand. I thought if I did understand it, maybe I could suggest ways that we could catalyze that. And that led to a very long obsession that ended up being that book.
Thank you for taking us through that journey. I do wonder why the interest in what's happening in the brain. I know that it sounds sexy in neuroscience. People think it's sexy, but what value does that give us above and beyond knowing psychologically what's happening when we change? Why is the brain so exciting?
For me, it's just like it's the thing I've chosen, or that shows me to how I try to make sense of being a stumbling, fumbling weirdo in this, in this meat sack mech suit. I grew up a very isolated, only child, latchkey parents in the woods of Mississippi. Like I had a hermitage childhood, and it was like I was just constantly in that state I think people go to the woods to be in, was my whole upbringing. And I always have been, it was when I discovered psychology and all the things that are surrounding it, and neuroscience and all, it was like, oh, this is a portal into understanding myself in a way that I really want to understand. And when it came to another aspect of growing up in that world, there was a lot of racism, a lot of sexism, a lot of anti-LGBT attitudes, a lot of anti-science attitudes, a lot of conspiracy thinking. And I wanted a window into why that was, because it seemed so clear to me that that wasn't true of the world at large that I was finding through television and movies and books and everything. The brain, though, I just felt, I guess growing up as a sci-fi nerd, it just felt like that was the way in. Like my dad had a subscription to Discover magazine, and he was an electrical engineer, and he had a subscription to Discover magazine. And they used to have this cartoon in the back that would just be like a science fact, but it was like a 6-panel cartoon. And one of them was on like why advertising works. And it was about how that they're the cookie company. Like, it seems silly. Like, we all know that you have cookies. Cookies are great. What are you trying to tell me? But the cartoon said, yeah, but when you go to the store and it's a choice between one you've never heard of and one you've seen on TV a lot, which will you pick? I was like, wait, that's not even like, there's something way deeper than what I thought was going on is going on. And from my sensibility, going into starting at neurons and then working your way up to abstractions and ideas, and working all the way back up to interactions between people, and then working all the way up to nations. It just feels like that's my version of some sort of, it's under the strain. It's like a holy reductionism for me. Like I find there's something nice in it, as long as you're okay to go to both sides of that spectrum and play around and not always reduce. There's something there that excites me.
Yeah, your new book, you argue that we have the power to shift our thinking in light of new evidence, to have conversations instead of debates, and to replace old ignorance with new wisdom. It certainly doesn't seem like humans have that capacity these days. I mean, who's doing that? Who's utilizing those facilities?
Well, we're doing it right now.
Well, we are.
Like,
it's true.
Like, I know a lot of this is preaching the choir. Because you're the expert on these topics, and I'm the dilettante journalist. But the way I've made sense of this, the ways I found my way into it, was through Piaget. I think I actually have the book close by. Oh yeah, this is such a great genetic epistemology.
The principles of genetic epistemology is what he just held up for those who are just listening. Nice.
Most people remember Piaget from the if you took any Psych 101 class, he's the one that was like,
yes.
You pour you've experienced this if you've ever gone to a bar and they give you the nice tall glass, like, oh, look at how much of the drink they gave me. Like he would do that with kids and see, like, when do they figure out that it's a wide, short glass and a tall, skinny glass have the same amount of liquid and it's not magically growing. He wanted to, like, understand, how does knowledge build up in the mind? How do minds create a structure of understanding the world? And he wanted to understand the stages so they could understand all the stages and all the way through adulthood. And there's these two principles that came out of that I found really compelling: assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is this all involves ambiguity and uncertainty. And when a mind approaches something that's ambiguous and uncertain, one way you can disambiguate it and arrive at some level of certainty is just interpret it as another version of something you already understand. But sometimes that's anomalies build up, or something is so outside your understanding or counters your model so much that you need to accommodate to fit it in there. And the example that I like to use to get out of all this psychological terminology is when a child sees a dog for the first time, and you say, hey, that's a dog. And something sort of categorical might be happening there, where they're thinking non-human, walks on 4 legs, furry, dog. Got it. Thank you. And then they see a horse for the first time, and kids often say things like, look, dog, or if they're really advanced, they might say big dog. And that's an attempt to assimilate. Like, I have this category: walks on 4 legs, it's furry, it's non-human, fits right in there. Thanks a bunch. It's more of what I already understand about the world. But then you say, no, that's a horse. Well, now, I have to create a new category for both horse and dog to fit into. And they may not articulate it yet, but it's creature or animal or something. And so you really have to expand your mind to accommodate this new concept. And so we're always doing that at all times. That's how we build up this robust model of reality to interact with whatever's going on outside our brains. And it's assimilation and accommodation all day long. And so everything we do changes our minds. Every experience, everything we learn, every conversation in some way. Sometimes we're changing it to confirm what we already think we know and understand and feel. And then sometimes we're challenged to update. But as it becomes much more robust, as that becomes much more complex, that tight walk that we walk of, we shouldn't change our mind if you can become dangerously incorrect by changing your mind when you shouldn't, or you can remain dangerously incorrect by not changing your mind when you should. That we start to err on the side of assimilation because this is such a complex model. It was taking us so long to get where we're at, and it got us here. Might as well preserve it. But then there's all these other motivations that will come into play, and we can get into that, where that baseline resistance is in maintaining the model. But then there's other motivations that will bounce up that baseline resistance very high, depending on the topic, depending on what the mental model is, the mental structure that we're working with. Brooke Harrington, to launch us into, to answer your question, I think she gave me something that I love repeating. She's a sociologist. She said, by her estimation, the E equals MC squared of social science is the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. So if the ship is going down, we'll put our reputations on the lifeboat, and we'll totally okay with our bodies going to the bottom of the ocean. That's such a strong motivation to avoid shame and guilt and ostracism, to maintain group identity, to keep your reputation safe, to manage your reputation, to signal that you're a good member of your group. That if that becomes the motive, if that's strong about the issue that at play, it bounces to the top, and resistance becomes very strong in that regard. And that's what I keep trying to say in the book, is that we focus a lot on the conclusions that people bring forth, the reasons they put forth as justifications and explanations for what they think and feel. But the motivations often get lost in that, and our conversations will kind of stay in that conclusion space where nothing fruitful will take place, because no one's helping each other go backwards through that chain to, well, why did I choose those facts as the ones that justify my feelings? And that's sort of the entry point into the whole topic.
Cool. So that's funny. You started off talking about what happens in the brain, and you did go to the psychological level.
Yeah. And we can keep going, like, because brains interact with brains, and then we have social structures.
Yes, but in my view, people overstate the excitement of a neuroscientific finding when it's just like a thermometer. It's just a pattern of brain activation reflection of the psychology. So the psychology is the meat, in my opinion.
That's great. Look, this is what you've already done to me. This pen is about to write that note.
This is just my view.
The trauma, loss, and uncertainty of our world have led many of us to ask life's biggest questions, such as who are we? What is our highest purpose? And how do we not only live through, but thrive in the wake of tragedy, division, and challenges to our fundamental way of living? To help us all address these questions, process what this unique time in human history has meant for us personally and collectively, and emerge whole, I've collaborated with my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Jordan Feingold, MD, to bring you our forthcoming book. It's called Choose Growth, a workbook for transcending trauma, fear, and self-doubt. It's a workbook designed to guide you on a journey of committing to growth and the pursuit of self-actualization every day. It's chock full of research from humanistic psychology, positive psychology, developmental psychology, personality psychology, cognitive science, and neuropsychology. So lots of themes that you hear about on this podcast. And it's aimed to help us all integrate the many facets of ourselves and co-create our new normal with a renewed sense of strength, vitality, and hope. Whether you're healing from loss, adapting to the new normal, or simply looking ahead to life's next chapter, Choose Growth will help steer you there to deeper connection to your values, your life vision, and ultimately your most authentic self. Choose Growth will officially hit the shelves September 13th, and you can order your copy or the audiobook in the US now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, and all major retailers. If you're in the UK and Commonwealth, you can order now at bookshop.org.uk. We truly hope this book helps you grow and thrive and become your best self. Okay, now back to the show.
So I want you to explain to me what you found in your research and in the book that happens in our brain when our minds change, because maybe you're going to change my mind about this.
Sure.
By explaining to me the neuroscience of it, I'm going to keep an open mind. Yeah. Do you see the meta sort of thing happening here?
I mean, I'm more in your camp. I mean, like most of the books, I move out of neuroscience very quickly into staying in psychological space.
Yeah.
The neuroscience chapter focuses mostly on the dress as a way to get us through that part, because I wanted this book to stay on the ground and be a lot of conversations with real human beings, be in real situations, visiting cults and people who left cults, visiting activist groups, visiting scientists, and so on. My interest, I think, when it comes to, if I discuss the neuroscience side of things, is the inevitability of the neuroscience of it. So, we have it's like I have toes and feet and I can't get away from the biology of my entity. And that's also true of the substrate that is generating mind or that mind is manifested amongst or whatever. And so the inevitability of it that I wanted to talk about because of the processes that lead to these psychological phenomena is there's very little opportunity to introspect, if any, to witness the process. It's the outcomes of the process are sort of that space we live within. The way I got into it was through the work of Pascal Wallish and Michael Karlovich at NYU. They were deeply fascinated with the dress, and they wanted to know why everybody disagreed on the dress and how come they couldn't change each other's minds about the dress. And which seems like a strange topic, but the arguments that people were having about the dress were intense and very similar to how people argue about wedge issues, in the sense that when you see the dress one way, if people aren't familiar, there's a dress image that went around the internet in 2015. I think almost every human being's seen it. Some people see it as black and blue, some people see it as white and gold. But whatever you see, that's how you see it. And you can't just like go, okay, now let me see it the other way. It's just your brain resolves the ambiguity of that image as in one way, and other brains resolve it in another way. And if you never meet somebody who sees it differently, you might not never know that it can be seen differently. And when you do meet someone like that, there can be like this existential thing that takes place where you're like, how can that be? How can two people see something different? How can two people see different colors? And then some people take it another step further, which is like, you're bonkers and I see it like there's something wrong with you, or wait a second, maybe there's something wrong with me. That's why I loved all that as a way to get into sort of the nature of what is the lowest level of disagreement or the most reductionist level. What they discovered was that the reason people see that differently, it was great because they had backgrounds in like vision research and sleep research, that the image was very ambiguous in the same way that a lot of those color illusions are, like the strawberries illusion and the checker shadow illusion. Most of those are tied to color constancy in some way or another, where the luminance of the image is either there are cues in the image that encourage you to assume a certain luminance, or the image is very ambiguous, and there's a urge to resolve what the luminance must have been. And on your behalf, this is why I talk about it in the book. On your behalf, the brain's like, okay, look, this thing is overexposed, and it's hard to see things that's overexposed. I'm anthropomorphizing all of this because that's how I make sense of things. The brain is over. Like, we know a pretty good bit about how we tend to do this, and there's a lot of speculation as to why. Maybe it's supposed to see blood in low light conditions, or identify fruit, or there's all these evolutionary psychology speculative ideas. But what does seem to happen is when something's overexposed or underexposed, we will, at the level of subjective experience, take the perception that whatever is all that chain that went from electromagnetic waves to eyeballs to retinas to brain. At the level of subjectively experiencing it, the luminance will be turned up or turned down. It will be subtracted. Some luminance will be subtracted or added to try to tell us what it ought to look like. Which I like to think of that as a lie your brain tells you in order for you to understand the truth that it assumes must be there. But it has to be based off something. Like there is a set of prior experiences you've had with overexposure and underexposure that dials in that, so that in those moments of ambiguity, you can resolve it like something beforehand. And it uses all these cues in the image to do so. In this, or in real life, it would do so. So in this case, it was, they determined by getting a lot of participants, I think it was 13,000 participants, that the more exposure that a person had had over the course of their life to things being overexposed in sunlight, the more they would subtract the luminance as if it was overexposed in sunlight. So this image was overexposed, but it was ambiguous. And they disambiguated it by saying, I think it's overexposed in sunlight. There's more blue in that spectrum. Subtract the blue, you get white and gold. If you spend more time in artificial light or incandescent light, this is more in the yellow spectrum. Overexposed in yellow, subtract the yellow, you get black and blue. So what I love about that is your life experiences have led to these priors. You're in an ambiguous moment, and then you disambiguate the ambiguous, and it resolves as a subjective experience. But all you get is the last part of that processing chain, and the ambiguity never registers. The fact that you disambiguate it never registers. It just seems like the raw truth of reality. And yet, your perceptual prejudices of what led you to that particular interpretation of the evidence in front of you. And another person who's has a different life experiences will do it differently than you. And they have this model called SURFPAD. Substantial uncertainty in the presence of ramified or forked prior assumptions will lead to disagreement. They love cheeky acronyms there. There's basically a line, and above that are all your experiences leading up to that, all your nature nurture. Underneath it is an ambiguous experience. Two different people with two different life experiences disambiguate it differently, and they disagree on the conclusions they reached. And I use that as a starting point to say, okay, this is a lot of neuroscience to help you get to the point of saying, like, because the brain is trapped in the skull, and subjective reality is this virtual illusory landscape of perceptions, everything is interpretation in this way to a degree. And then we build on that with layers and layers of abstraction, and we build up minds. That's where you get in psychological space. And disagreement has a really, really reductive root in that spot. But we have, thanks to the fact that we're social animals, there are ways that we have negotiated to take advantage of that. Whereas if we're in a group, this is where in the book I get into the Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber stuff about the interactionist model, and Tom Stafford's stuff about the truth win scenario, where Mercier and Sperber argue that in their model that we have two systems, one for producing propositions and arguments and one for evaluating them. And the production one is very individual, like from an individual perspective, we produce a biased and lazy arguments. And then in groups, we offload all the cognitive labor to the group evaluation of all that. And the whole purpose of that is or the function of it is to, for setting communal goals, plans of action, to disambiguate as a group when we need to interpret something that all of us are finding mysterious and strange. And in a way, it's like, I think of it like the muscles of your arm weren't, the selective pressures weren't such as to create a appendage for painting paintings, but we can do that with it. And these argumentative psychological mechanisms are more for like group goals and planning, but they can be employed for things like logic and philosophy and science and so on. But at its root, it's like it's great at deliberating. It's great at arguing in a way where we compare our perspectives and try to determine what the truth is. And the dress comes back around in that, because I imagine if you had two people trying to argue that, okay, the way I see it is the way to see it, I'm right and you're wrong, nothing fruitful really comes out of that. But if you had two people approach that same situation and say, okay, let's go shoulder to shoulder on this and try to understand, why do you think we disagree? Why would we see it differently? That's the only investigation that will lead to that amazing deeper truth of, oh, this has to do with sunlight and priors and stuff. So the debate frame, people should be frustrated with that, because oftentimes that is not a fruitful way to make sense of the world. Whereas let's compare our perspectives and try to determine why we disagree, it turns out there's an incredibly fruitful way to make sense of things. And it's also the way that persuasion, the kind of persuasion I talk about in the book that actually works, that's almost always what it's built on top of.
It just seems like it's so hard to convince people of facts that contradict their ideology.
Well, yeah, that makes sense though, right? Like, here's if I can keep going on a long rants with you. I can fall back on motivated reasoning for this, Scott. Look, when you fall in love with somebody, all their little nuances, the way they talk, the way they curl their lip, the way they comb their hair, the way they walk, the way they cut their food, the songs they like, the dumb jokes they tell, those are reasons why you like them. When you're in that first stage, that honeymoon, motivated by all these drives and all these emotions, if something happens over the course of that relationship where it falls apart and you're starting to break up, the reasons why you want to break up with that person are the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they cut their food, that stupid song they like all the time, the dumb jokes they have. The evidence, the facts of the matter remain the same. They remain as neutral as they ever were, but you're using them as reasons and justifications for one thing in one situation, the reasons and justifications for another in another, because the motivation changed, the emotion changed, the attitude changed. And this is also how we approach evidence in these political debates, where you start with some motivation you may not even be aware of, some attitude you may have never articulated that may not be salient to you. And all the evidence in the world, you go cherry picking it and saying, that's a good justification for how I feel. That's a good justification for how I feel. That's a good justification. And the other person on the other side of the issue has been doing the exact same thing while you were doing that. And when you meet, if you meet saying, the reason I feel this way is because of, and you produce one of these justifications, that's not the reason you felt that way. That's some justification you found along the way. And we have these intractable debates because we stay in that space where we throw all our facts into a little arena and let them fight each other, as if that's why we ever thought that in the first place. But we're not having a debate or even a meeting of minds over the motivations that led us to these things, these attitudes that came from somewhere. And that's why we argue so much, is because the platforms in which we argue, like Twitter, they don't facilitate that kind of discussion, not really well.
No. No. They're the opposite. That's really insightful. Do you really think we're living in a post-truth world right now?
I don't. I think we're living in a post-trust world. That's what I say in the book. I think that...
that's good. That's good.
There's a great researcher, Kate Starbird, who studies what people do during crises, like whether it's like a tornado or a hurricane or a building on fire or something like that. We seem to switch over into this there's so much information coming at us, and it's difficult to determine what to go with. But also the anxiety is very high, so there's a compulsion to be like, well, we do need to make a decision. We do need to go with something, and rumors are everywhere, just nonstop. I remember I lived through Katrina. I lived through a tornado. I remember the aftermath where, like, you hear all these rumors about this is when the power is coming on, or this is what's going to happen next. This is when the firefighters will be here. And if your neighbor across the street is like, hey, I hear the power is coming back on Tuesday, you're like, maybe not. I mean, I know that dude, he's a pretty cool guy. But, but if like a police officer comes through. They're like, "Hey, just want to let you know, power's going to be back on Tuesday. Hope you're all doing okay." You're like, "Oh, okay." Like, and we're modulating all of this at all times. We're just titrating our skepticism.
Sure.
And I feel like she makes the argument that whether or not we should be in a state of high anxiety, we certainly are, thanks to sort of the information ecosystem getting really chaotic and new with all the new tools we have. And then also it's very chaotic. It's nothing but information coming at you at all times, that we've sort of gotten acclimated to that rumor space where we need to modulate and titrate by trust. Because and then at the same time, all that stuff got fragmented and disrupted. Like, there's not just 3 news channels or 2 newspapers with all the Pulitzer Prizes. Like, I can click right off of the New York Times onto Flaming Eagle, PlatoFactory.com, which also has some news stories on it. It's tough, right? So how do you modulate all that? I feel like in a very Marshall McLuhan way that we'll sort it all out, but we're in that middle phase between the old and the next, where we're modulating by trust. And I mean, facts still work in places where people trade in the currency of facts, like in
medicine,
medicine, science, with where they're playing that game of, lots of evidence, hypothesis testing, the chips fall where they may. I vet you, you vet me. But in the wider scale of things, I feel like it's really being modulated by trust. And since we can group up so easily on the internet, like we can find a group of people who have the exact same anxieties we have or the same prejudices we have. And then now we can leave everybody and go hang out by ourselves. And then that becomes the group I trust, or that becomes in the information sources that everybody says are the good ones. That's the ones we trust. It feels like post-truth, but I feel like it's more of a case of I'm not sure who to trust, so I'm going to kind of hedge my bets. And that creates a strange world to pass ideas back and forth.
Yeah. The group we should trust the least is our in-group. No, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true, but I saw a study recently. It depends on your in-group, I guess. Yes. I saw a study recently showing that, especially when a group reaches a point of collective narcissism, they're more likely to betray each other. Within the in-group. Yeah. I tweeted that one out.
Collective narcissism.
I tweet out some chestnuts, my friend. I
keep up as much as I can.
So much of this just seems to come down to this deeply tribal chip in our brain, right? How do we change our minds in large groups? And can that kind of change be catalyzed?
I'll take that in 2 different directions in an attempt to do it simultaneously. The whole tribal thing, and I understand that I understand a lot of, there are efforts out there to not use tribal anymore, and I get that. So we can just say in-group, out-group if we have to, but the thing we're talking about, that in-group affinity, out-group, fear and skepticism.
Even hate.
Like in the book, I talk all about Tajfel and his research into how quickly we will form groups over literally any identifier. The old minimal group paradigm, where he was hoping he thought it would take forever to find it. And it was he found it first try with a page of dots. It was how many dots do you see? And then he took it away real fast and said, he randomly assorted people into overestimators or underestimators. And then once they've been told they were in one or the other, everything that came after that was about us versus them. If the outcome of the next experiment that he did would benefit the in-group, that's what they went with. If it would hurt the out-group, that's what they went with, even though they had just been labeled this and it wasn't even real. And particularly, Leah Mason talked to me about all this. It was they give them a chance to wasn't they weren't going to get any money, but they were allotting money to another task that other people had done, and they told them there was overestimators and underestimators. They would choose the thing that would give less money to their in-group if it gave even less money to the out-group. We will choose the worst outcome if we think it'll hurt the out-group more. And that's at such a minimal level, and that's been replicated so much from showing people different paintings and telling them what kind of fan they are, or just giving people hats and armbands. It seems like it's very, very foundational, and I'm assuming it has to be something to do with our ultra social primate nature. The us versus them framing, once it's there, it becomes a high motivator for everything else that comes after. Yet we still do change our minds in very large ways and very rapidly. And I couldn't make. This is the thing that took the longest for me to wrap my head around. I had to go into network science for this and talk to people like Duncan Watts.
Yeah, that's great.
Duncan Watts was immensely helpful in all of this. And Greg Sittel, if I'm saying his name correctly, has a great book about this called Cascades.
Yes.
The short version of this is, to make sense of it, is, okay, if you've ever tried to get into a college classroom or a restaurant or something, let's imagine it's a classroom, and there's a lot of people waiting to get in, and so you just go, okay, I guess I'll stay. Something's going on. Minutes go by, and then the door opens up, and the professor's like, "What are you doing?" And there's nobody in there, and then everybody goes, "Oh!" They all rush in. Like, this is an example of cascades affecting human behavior. So the first person that shows up, they're basing what they're going to do on an internal signal, as they put it. Maybe in the past, to speak back to like priors and experiences and assimilation and accommodation, like maybe in the past, they did walk into a classroom once, and there was like a whole class, and they turned around and they were like, and they got weirded out by it. So they have that inside them. Or maybe they're just nature nurture they're an anxious person in this regard. And they don't even try it out. Maybe it's both. But whatever it is, they have an internal signal. They show up, the door's closed. They don't want to try it out. So they take out their phone and start playing with it. Well, the second person that shows up, they now have one external signal and one internal signal. And since we are social primates, that external signal is pretty strong. And unless they are a super rebellious type person, they will go, well, there's somebody waiting. There's got to have a reason to wait. And they play around their phone. This is sometimes it's referred to as thresholds of conformity, sort of like that old Solomon Asch stuff. So this person, their threshold of conformity wasn't such that they were willing to buck anything. So they just went along with it. But now, once there's two people waiting, it's really, you'd have to be a real rabble rouser, a real punk, to be like, I'm just going to walk past these two people and open the door. Or maybe you could have to be very charismatic and say, hey, are you guys waiting? Is there anybody in there? But if you're not that person, you become person 3. You start to see what's unfolding. Each person who joins the cascade makes the cascade stronger for the next person who joins. And you end up with a self-perpetuating cascade that once there's 3 people waiting, 4 people waiting, it's almost inevitable that the entire class now is going to wait. That's one type of cascade. The other type of cascade is sort of, that's a cascade to not do something. There's also a cascade to do something, which would be like when a party empties and you don't know why, like, especially if you're the host and you're like, everybody just kind of leaves all at once.
Awkward.
But it's the same sort of phenomenon where like, there's one person, you can think of them as an early adopter if you want to go into like diffusion science. Like, those early adopters, like, I'm ready to go. I'm out of here. And the next person to go, they were just waiting for somebody to go. And then once that one person goes, they go. Well, now two people left, and there's somebody who, like, they were okay with being there, but 2 people are gone, and they are a little tired, so this is their chance to get out. Now 3 people are gone. There are people who each person who adds to the cascade makes the cascade stronger for the next person, till people who didn't have any intention to leave feel weird for not leaving, and then everybody's gone. So it looks, when you get into network science, and the way I visualize it is like one of those molecule models in chemistry where the little balls connected with sticks. The balls are human beings, and the sticks are their relationships, and it's usually reduced to being strong versus weak. I'll help you move versus, I'll give you a kidney, kind of things. We all have these clusters of strong connections, and then each one of us within that cluster is connected to other groups, usually weakly, sometimes strongly. And the way Duncan Watts made this make sense to me was, he said that the tipping point model is way off. That's not how this goes, because in that model, you're pursuing virality. And virality is fine for like passing around news, or where all it takes is one contact with another person for the idea to get transferred. But it's not a great model for changing minds, or because there's risk involved in that. There's risk and reward, and there's these thresholds of conformity.
Thresholds of conformity.
Yeah. So like some people are early adopters. They'll just do it because one other person is doing it. Some people, though, a lot of people are in the middle, that I need a lot more people in my life to do that before I'll do that. And some people are holdouts, like, I ain't ever getting a cell phone. They still have a fax machine and something like that. And you take something like quitting smoking or even like obesity, like the Farmingham study, the great Christakis research. He talks about it in his book about you could just watch these things move through networks, and it's incredible how just having somebody in your network gain weight will make everybody close to that person gain a little weight, and then it ripples through the network. So these thresholds of conformity are part of that. Here's how Duncan Watts made it make sense to me. He said, it has nothing to do with somebody being super connected or somebody being very charismatic or being like just a connector or a maven or all those things. It's the susceptibility of the network itself to the particular change. And he said, imagine you're in a car, and is there somebody in a car? They drive down a forest path. They drive down a road in a forest every day on the way to work. At the same point every day, they take their cigarette and they flick it out the window. And they've been doing that for 10 years. And every day it bounces, lands in the brush, nothing happens. And then one day they do that flick, it lands, and it causes a wildfire that burns down 6 counties. So their behavior and that individual and what they were doing didn't change, but the network in which they were striking, as they put it in that parlance, something happened there. Maybe there was a firefighter strike, or there was a long drought, or that a tree in that one particular spot fell over in just the right way to create just the right conditions. The fire hit it. When it caught fire, it dried out the stuff around it. It made it, and then the cascade formed and so on. So he's said, if you think of human networks in that way, all those little balls and sticks as they undulate and move, and people meet and unmeet and join groups and leave groups and all that stuff. If enough early adopters catch on to switch on to something, and they have neighbors who are similar in threshold level to them, and they flip over, then they become, as a unit, very influential to people who are a little more hesitant. And then the little bit more hesitant will flip, and now you have an even larger cascade, and so on and so on and so on. So all the stuff related to like individuals, when it comes to trying to persuade one person to think in a different way, any flip that takes place in that regard has the potential to flip their neighbors just by the sake that person's flipped. And that can lead to a situation, they call it a percolating vulnerable cluster, a group of people whose conditions are just right. Everyone's thresholds are at just the right spot. They're connected in just the right strengths, and they have connections out of their group into other groups at just the right level, that if the change takes place in that percolating vulnerable cluster, it'll be like the cigarette that lands in that one spot. And since that percolating vulnerable cluster is always popping in and out of existence, like it's like fireflies blinking in the network, because it can be percolating for a little while, then it's not, because people shift so quickly. Our relationships move so quickly. For a big change to take root in a large group of people, you need people who are committed to that change constantly striking at the network. And if they may have to live their entire lives striking at it and failing, and then they pass down the effort to the next group of people to do the same thing. Or they put their effort in, how can I get as many people as possible to be striking at the network in as many different places? That persistence often leads to that lucky strike that will lead to a massive cascade of change. And that seems to be true. The things like Stonewall were happening every weekend in the United States for years and years and years, and eventually happened in a place where the cascade set off. Things like massive moments in the civil rights movement, things were happening constantly, but the fact that they were happening constantly and spreading, the activism was spreading, made it much more likely for the cascade to take root. And you end up with something that looks a lot like, and I'll stop with this one, it ends up with something like punctuated equilibrium is what it looks like. I think there's something in social science called critical juncture theory that's very similar, but it looks to me more like punctuated equilibrium in biology, where long periods of stasis, where you think the status quo is forever, and then rapid moments of change, and then stasis, and then rapid moments of change. And if you're in the status quo period, it seems like, well, this is forever. People will never change their minds. And if you happen to live through one of these rapid moments, you'll have that, like, you'll be blessed with the knowledge that, oh no, change can happen very rapidly, so fast that it's shocking. And we've seen that all throughout human history.
Oh yeah, we've seen it in cultural shifts in just the past couple of years. Mm-hmm. How does this nerdy information that you're presenting to me right now apply to? How does it apply I'm curious how it applies to cults and conspiratorial ideas.
Oh man,
I know that you've looked into both. I think the left wing is a cult, and I think the right wing is conspiratorial.
There's your hot take. Put that on Twitter right now so I can watch what happens.
I might edit that out.
Yeah, don't edit that out. That's great. That's it. You pissed off both sides simultaneously.
Yeah. That's how I would characterize both sides.
It's a good characterization in that I think, this is my own personal opinion, it's the same phenomenon. It's just, it manifests differently and depending on like what's up. Like, we're social primates and we group up. And one of my metaphors, I'm a very storytelling metaphor, Darmok and Jalad kind of guy. If you get the Darmok and Jalad reference, I will send you some delicious licorice in the mail. That's a Star Trek: The Next Generation episode where the translators don't work, but even though they understood the aliens perfectly with English, they spoke in metaphor only, and so you had to understand their culture to get what they were saying. They're like Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, and I'm like, okay, like Tiga with his arms wide. Like I understand the words, but not the reference. It was a great episode that like predicted meme culture. Cause like if you just duck out of meme culture for 2 days and come back, you'll have no idea what people are telling you. I remember somebody saying, Wordle is the sourdough starter of the Omicron. And I was thinking like, man, people 1 year before this and 1 year after this may not understand what the hell that means. It sounds so Darmok in July. So here's one of those. Let's say you're in a tent in the woods and you hear a strange sound, and your compulsion is you have this negative affect, you have these bad feelings, and your compulsion is, I want to go gather some more information to confirm whether or not my anxiety is justified, is reasonable. Well, just in that word, justification and reasonable, to whom? To you? Or it's more like you're doing it for an imaginary audience member. Because we're such social primates, we often don't engage in behavior unless it feels like it's the most justifiable action, because it's almost like we're predicting we're going to have to defend ourselves later in front of some sort of trial of our peers. And also, if it's something that's dangerous, we want to bring other people into the fold because it may be dangerous to all of us. So your first compulsion is like, let me go see if that's what that sound was, so I can either confirm or disconfirm my anxieties are justified.
Yeah.
Well, it was harder to do this in the past. You had to have like charismatic, glad handsy people moving through town to get you on board, coming through town with a van with messages wrapped around bananas. That's literally how the Moonies used to get people. They would go to areas of town where they figured people had just moved there. Like they had people that were like hard on their luck. And they'd offer bananas out of a van with a religious tract wrapped around it and say, hey, come join us for this meeting.
They do that here in Santa Monica.
Wow. So like when you have an anxiety or a fear, or maybe you have a motivation for you need validation, you want that nice group hug feeling, you definitely feel the lack of those things when you don't have, you feel the lack of getting those things resolved. You usually go looking for other people who share the anxiety, will talk with us about the anxiety. You go looking for the validation that you desire. On the internet, it's very easy to do that now. If you have an anxiety or a prejudice, you can go looking for other people who have that same anxiety or fear. Maybe something bad happened in your life. You're just looking for other people who are going through that to just see what they're saying, to see if you can get some meat to work through it.
Yeah.
There are all these motivational allures. Annie Sternisko at NYU talked to me about this, and so did Joseph Usinski at the University of Miami. One of the main motivational allures for going either into a conspiratorial community or a cult, or really any organization, you don't have a strong self-identity and you're trying to create it, or you have a certain anxiety or fear or prejudice that you it's making you feel like you might be an untrustworthy member of your community, but you want to assure that you are, and you go looking for people that can like justify you. And these allures get you into the group. You'll find your group very easily on the internet. In the older days, it'd be a little bit more difficult, but there are ways to get people to find their groups or to get you into a place to meet up with other people. If it's a cult, what they'll slowly do is snip away all of your other sources of validation, all your other sources of group hugginess, and all your other ways of addressing your anxieties until they're the only place. if it's a conspiratorial community, what usually happens is it's the same effect, but as you become more aligned with the group and you're spending more time with them and you're hanging out with them more often, you're starting to entertain more ideas. It's other people in your life. You start to get that sense that they're not going to like that. They're going to shame you for it. And so you start doing the snipping on your own. And eventually, it doesn't matter what got you into it. You're in it because you're in the community now. And those social goals, that Brooke Harrington stuff, that fear of social death, becomes the new motivation. And all of it goes back to groupishness in that way. Like conspiratorial communities, what they believe, what they think, what they feel, pretty much irrelevant to what's keeping them in the group. What's keeping the group is the group. Cults, however they got into it, the things that they espouse, they proselytize, pretty much irrelevant for why you're staying in the group. You're in the group because you're in a group. It's the shame, the ostracism, the guilt, the fear, the social things that it does. The onboarding is multifaceted, but the staying in is pretty much the same phenomenon. The good news is that the offboarding, the off ramp, is this with the caveat. This is the hardest thing in the world to change somebody's mind about, to pull them out of a conspiratorial community or a cult. The off ramp is the same way they got in. It's everyone I spoke to, people at Westboro Baptist Church who had left, people who were in conspiratorial communities who left them, people who were like pseudo-conspiratorial, pseudo-cults and conspiratorial communities. I talked to people in anti-vaxxer groups and the Moonies and 9/11 truthers and the flat earthers.
Wow,
and
you did a lot of research.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with other people. Flat earthers, by the way, the flat earthers are the ones that are the most fun to hang out with. But everybody else, not as much fun. The people who left those groups, they all had pretty much the same story. They either entertained being part of another group for a little while and were in both groups at the same time, or someone outside of that community offered a hand to them and offered them some non-judgmental, compassionate listening. And they started to get the sense that their values could be affirmed in a different place than they were being affirmed. And if there was anything that they didn't like about that group they were already in, and most of the time there was a lot of stuff, that was sort of the crack that let in the light of, I don't actually have to be here. There are other places that would welcome me. And that seems to be how you build a pretty stable off-ramp to get out of a group like that. It doesn't happen in one conversation, and it takes a while to build that kind of rapport and to give a person a social safety net so that they can do that kind of escape. But that seems to be pretty common.
That's good to know. I think we're all part of a cult and we don't know it.
We're all social primates.
Correct.
We want to, if you get a chance to get Will Storr on here, I really recommend. He has a new book out called The Status Game. It just came out in the United States. And that's all it talks about is this one thing we're plugging away at, this deeply human primal desire to group up and what happens once you have, and how people die on that hill of reputation management so often.
Yeah. Thanks for that recommendation. What is technique rebuttal? And what are some of the best actionable methods for persuading people of something you want to persuade them of?
This is my favorite thing in the world now.
Really?
It is. Like, as part of this investigation, I wanted to reach out to people who were actually changing minds professionally. But I didn't want to hang out with people who I felt like were using coercion. I spent some time with
manipulation.
I spent time with cult deprogrammers. I took the whole chapter out because I just it was just so gross and weird, and I didn't feel like it added anything to the discussion. It's fascinating. I'll put it somewhere, but I spoke with Ted Patrick, the person who invented cult deprogramming. He's up in his 90s now, and it's all very pseudoscientific. Brainwashing doesn't have any like it's not well regarded as a real thing that actually has ever happened. Cult deprogramming is mostly kidnapping somebody and saying, if you stop going back and meeting those people, I'll let you have a sandwich and you can go home. Like it's coercion. It's the same coercion that they're railing against, and it's bad and it's illegal and it's a whole thing. But I did start finding these groups who were doing something else. And I found deep canvassing from the LGBT Center of Los Angeles' leadership lab. I found street epistemology, which is everywhere, but it kind of really got started in San Antonio. Smart Politics with Karen Tamarius. And one of the things that astonished me was all these different groups. They had never met each other. Most of them didn't have a really good understanding of any scientific literature that might explain what they did. But they all came up with methods that were pretty much the same. And they did that because they did a bunch of A/B testing. They, especially the leadership lab, they did 17,000 conversations, recorded them on video, kept what worked and threw away what didn't. And they all landed on something that after I took this to experts, they said, this is very close to motivational interviewing. The therapeutic concept that arose out of like addiction and alcoholism, like dealing with those problems. Then two researchers, Cornelia Betch and her research partner, they grouped these up into one thing called technique rebuttal versus topic rebuttal. Topic rebuttal is when you just trade facts back and forth the way two people behind a lectern in front of an audience would, or two academics who are in a good faith environment where we're all playing by the same rules would say, well, here's my evidence, here's this evidence, blah, blah, blah. We had to invent those kind of situations. When it comes to straight up, I'm just talking to you, my friend, my family member, my person on the internet who's being mean to me. The topic rebuttal doesn't go so well because we're dealing with all that justification stuff. Technique rebuttal is, instead of focusing on conclusions, instead of saying what you believe, instead of debating that, instead of debating how you feel about the issue, it's why do you believe that? What brought you to that feeling? What's the source of all this? What's the processing chain that got you here? And instead of you doing some sort of copy-paste thing, you open up a space so that the other person introspect and explore in a way that they might not do otherwise. So it usually goes in steps, and the steps are roughly the same. I think they shift if you're working on a difference of belief, an attitude, or a value. They all open up with rapport in the sense that you're trying to not stimulate reactance, that push away feeling that a person gets when they feel like you're taking away their agency or their freedom to behave in the way they want to behave. If you suggest anything along the lines of, you should be ashamed of what you think, feel, and believe, reactance. And I'm sure you felt this, like when somebody on the internet's like, you should be ashamed for saying that. Like, I don't necessarily want to engage with that person anymore. I just want them to stop. Right. I want them to stop talking to me.
Block.
Right. And then in the psychological parlance, they say something like, you become motivationally aroused to reduce the influence of the stimulus object.
I love it. I love it. That's a perfect description of how I feel.
And it's like algorithmic. Like, I reduced the stimulus object's impact, and now I no longer run the algorithm. We're good. And if they stick around, then I'll run it over and over again until they go away. If you've ever been a teenager or had a teenager, you've felt this. Your parents may have really good advice for you. They love you and they care about you. And then they tell you this advice and you're like, don't tell me what to do. And you push away. And then if you push in a way that makes them feel reactance, then they'll push at you. And then you push back, and then they push back, and then you get into a feedback loop until you eventually like, I hate you. I never want to talk to you again.
Yes.
Or you say something ridiculous, like, let's agree to disagree. Like, you already agreed to disagree. That's how this whole thing started. You're just saying something to get out of talking anymore, to reduce the impact of the stimulus object. So you want to start out with that. To get out of reactance, you have to say, be very transparent. You have to say that this person's in control of the situation. They can leave at any time. They choose to move forward at each step, and keep saying that. So build that rapport. Also, it's good to just hang out. Like, you can go watch a movie with somebody that's your friend, and you can watch it and love it. And then when you get out, they hate it. And you're like, oh my God, you hated it? Why did you hate it? I don't feel like I want to never talk to you again because you hate the movie that I love. We can just talk about it, right? That's because you've built up a lot of rapport and trust with that person. So if you have a relationship with another person, your previous conversations have brought you to a spot where you are already at conflict, you're going to have to do some work to get yourself back into a trust state. So you can't even start this persuasion thing until you return to that. However, if the person's a stranger, you can generate some real good, open, early trust by just being transparent and telling them, I'm just here. I just want to hear what you have to say. I'm actually interested in your perspective. And if it's different from mine, I want to understand why. Give them person all of that freedom up front. And then you open up with something very simple. If it's a fact-based claim, you ask for the claim. If it's an attitude, you ask, how do you feel about this particular issue? And once they state that, ask them to sort of define it a little bit better for you so that you know that you're talking about the exact same thing. Some people like politics, if you say politics, your version of politics is like a civics textbook and theirs is lizards in a dark room dividing up the country before golf. Like, you make sure you're on the same page.
Yeah.
And whatever their definitions are, use theirs, not yours. Because remember, all of this is going to be on their side. The point of this is you're opening up space for them to introspect. And then ask for a numerical measure of either attitude or confidence. If it's a fact-based claim, ask for a measure of confidence. How much do you believe this is true, 0 to 10? If it's an attitude, how strongly do you feel about this? And you might have to say, like, all guns should be illegal, or you should get a gun in the mail every week. Something to kind of get their attitude on a scale. And then this is where the magic starts. You ask whatever they say. If they say they're a 7, ask, why does that number feel right to you? And this is technique rebuttal in its essence, because I'm going to now help you introspect and metacognate. And I'm going to take a step back, and my role in this is to hold space, reflect, paraphrase, and help you do that work, because you're going to generate the arguments and counter arguments. I'm not going to copy and paste any of mine into you. And just that feeling right off the bat is like, it's really fun to do. Like if you just, I think the last movie you watched, like Top Gun Maverick, what would you give it on a scale of 1 to 10? And like you say, well, I give it an 8. Like, why an 8? I love asking that of people, or asking of yourself, because they almost always go, well, that well thing is so powerful. That's a person engaging in a completely different kind of thought process than that really quick, here's how I feel about it. Well, I mean, I love, and they start just spooling out what comes to mind. And then that's where the motivational interviewing tricks come in. Like, and I shouldn't use the word tricks, but like, that's like, in that techniques in therapeutic practices, the person wants to change. That's why they came to the therapy, but they're ambivalent in some way. They both want to do it and not do it, whatever it is the thing they're trying to remove. And so what you do is you encourage them to self-generate counter arguments in the direction of change. And this is also true for a discussion of anything like flat Earth or whatever. Like if you want them to go in the direction, in one particular direction, ask them to generate counter arguments on the other side. So like if they're a 7, you would say, depending on the issue, you'd say like, why not a 6? Why not a 5? And they start generating arguments for why they're not going that way, which end up being arguments for going the other way. And that as they generate those counter arguments, those are the first time they've articulated those things, and they become counter arguments that weight them more in that other direction.
Brilliant.
And then if you want to go deeper, that's really as far as you have to go. But if you want to go deeper in something like street epistemology and deep canvassing, they'll often ask things like, where did you first hear about this issue? Have you ever had any life experiences related to it? They're hoping to generate some sort of cognitive dissonance in there, because you'll remember things that aren't in line with the number that you gave earlier, and you'll further articulate it. Or if it's a fact-based claim, they'll ask, after you give all these reasons and justifications, they'll ask, what is the method by which you're vetting that these are good reasons? These are good justifications. And oftentimes a person will feel the fragility of their epistemology in that regard. And you just repeat this as many times as the person's willing to do it, wrap up, wish them well. And I have watched so many of these conversations, and it's wild to watch someone articulate themselves out of what they think. And we probably all experienced that, where you're like, did you like that play we just watched? And they're like, oh, I loved it. It's like, and then like, what did you like about it? Like, well, it was good. I mean, I didn't really like how this happened. And then by the end of it, say like, well, when I think about it, I didn't really like it that much, actually. And like, and you could like run some sort of YouTube slider in your mind of like, I loved it. Oh, I didn't like it that much. Like that elaboration is very powerful if you can encourage that in other people. And if you disagree about the issue, you can finally get to that point where you're like, I have a different perspective about this. And it's astonishing to me how I can love you and respect you and care about you, and we can see this so differently. I wonder why that is. And exploring the mystery of why we disagree can be done in a way where the other person doesn't feel threatened, and you don't have to compromise your values.
Oh, that's the ideal, isn't it? A lot of this is ideal.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't see much of it anywhere. I
don't think we see much of it in the context where we're doing a lot of our engaging. But
especially on social media.
I'm optimistic that we'll sort this out eventually. But I do agree. It's difficult to get into this unless you're face-to-face or on Zoom or something.
Well, maybe people reading your book will have their own minds changed, and will find ways of helping to change other people's minds as well. Really, really timely book, like I think I said earlier as well. Really timely book, important book. I really appreciate the work you've done longer than me. You're one of the very few podcasts out there, I say this all with all due humility, that's longer than the Psychology Podcast. I believe you're one of the real true OGs.
Yeah.
I view myself as an OG, but I think you're like even the grandfather OG.
I think 11 years.
How many
maybe,
years?
12?
11 years. See, I've done it 7 years. 8 years, but 11, 12, I remember when I first entered this space, you were a big model for me.
Oh,
and
awesome.
Very much so.
And Scott, you've been incredibly like super influential in my thinking. Like I will never forget when you came on my show a couple of years back, and I had like a live spiritual awakening moment because our conversation was really ejecting me from a lot of toxic self-talk, I think, and
that was a great chat.
I really value you as a human being. I really appreciate the work you do.
Yeah. Well, likewise. It's a mutual admiration in society. It's nice when someone who inspires you to do the work you do, because when I went there 7, 8 years ago, who else was in that space but you? I mean, it was you. And to be able to hear such a thing from you that I may have played a role in your own thinking, it really touches me. It really does. So I only have one last question is, where's your pipe?
My pipe?
Isn't there a picture of you? You're not so smart with the funny. Pipe.
That picture, I'll tell you very briefly, a 1-minute story. That picture is of a musician named Wes Borlani.
I didn't know the backstory.
Many years ago when I started You Are Not So Smart, I knew exactly the image I wanted. I wanted a smarmy person from a certain time period who was going to look at me condescendingly. And that's what I wanted the image to be. That's what and I went to iStock Photo, typed in my search, and looked and finally found the perfect picture. I was like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted. Took it, did a little photoshopping, been my logo ever since. I found out later, thanks to this person has a band called the White Ghost Shivers that
great name
is out of Austin. They iStock Photo went from town to town in the early days to build up their stock by telling bands, we will give you free band photos if you give us all the rights forever to the pictures we take of you.
Wow.
And that was one of the pictures he took. And his audience, it hasn't happened in a long time, but in the beginning I kept getting all these messages like, why are you stealing Wes's picture? Or why did you do that? And I was like, I bought it off iStock Photo. I had no idea. So that's how that came about.
Oh my God, that is funny. Is it still the picture?
Still the picture,
right now?
Still the picture.
Cool,
in the UK version of the book, it's the cover. So.
Oh, good to know. I think I did know that actually. Yeah. Well, David, thanks again for coming on my show, and you're always welcome back.
No, thank you so much, man. I hope to see you again soon.
Me too. Good luck with the book tour.
Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology Podcast. If you'd like to react in some way to something you heard, I encourage you to join in the discussion at thepsychologypodcast.com or on our YouTube page, The Psychology Podcast. We also put up some videos of some episodes on our YouTube page as well, so you'll want to check that out. Thanks for being such a great supporter of the show, and tune in next time for more on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.